trust in his name. It's all you have. You can trust in many things in life. You can trust your friends, your family, your partner. Some people only trust in themselves. Let the strength of their own two hands carry them to where they want to go. That was me, because I didn't have any of the other stuff. It made me stronger and more independent. It sounds good on paper, but for the most part, it just meant I was running from what could help me. It meant hurting those who tried. It meant destroying myself before anyone had the chance to hurt me. Therapy helped me realize that. It began when I bought a house in a quiet suburb. Hard work had paid off. I could finally afford to pay a loan. I screwed up a relationship with the love of my life, so I had nothing else going on. Why not sell my soul to the bank for the next 30 years? I didn't have much stuff to move in, so the day I got the keys was pretty much the day I moved in. Television, bed, computer, that's it. Ready to settle into a new routine, one that would hopefully be a lot more healthy. The next day, I woke up close to noon, only because somebody rang the doorbell. "Hi, we wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," a middle-aged couple said. Another buzz a day later. "Hi, Father Samuel," a man my age greeted me. "I'm your neighbor." 2 days later. "Hi, we're the Cummings family," a group said. "I'm Stephen. This is Camille, our children." On and on. It was a friendly place, but most names slipped my mind. I also made a poor impression. I would be in my pajamas, or reeking of alcohol, or just an asshole. Nobody wanted to talk to that person. I never heard from them again, except Father Samuel's. He was a weekend priest and only went to church on Saturdays and Sundays. Otherwise, he spent his time on the front porch, reading a good book. He would wave as I went to work, but mostly, he showed little interest in me. It was the same relationship I had with a random guy at the gym. The days passed. The house remained mostly empty, and I was the only one to go inside. No friends, no new girl, just me by my lonesome after work. I was more than surprised when I saw a wooden cross nailed to an empty wall adjacent to the kitchen. I had come home from work, walked up to the fridge, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and turned around to see this antique cross the size of my head. The surprise faded, and I started doubting my memory. Maybe it was always there. Could have been left by the previous owners. It's the kind of thing you just tend to look over and not think about. But had I looked over it for almost a week? That's unlikely. I ignored it, went upstairs, and did my usual evening routine. The next day, I took the cross off the wall and threw it into the trash. Father Samuel waved at me as I left, and for the first time, I waved back, mostly out of guilt. When I got home, I found 2 nailed to the walls, one in the living room and another in my bedroom. I'm not an idiot. I knew that they were never there before. Definitely not in my bedroom. These crosses were different from the first, carved differently. One was done so well, it looked like a store-bought one. I started to walk around my home with light feet, clenching my fist. I was thinking angry thoughts to help my courage build up. I imagined somebody around every corner, and I was itching to throw a punch or send out a brutal kick. The anger faded. When I checked every room and found nothing, I would have heard someone if they were still there. An empty house echoes. I ended up double-checking the locks and the windows that night. The next day, I did the same and finally armed the home security system. I didn't used to do that, only ever setting the alarm if I was going on a long weekend. I just wasn't worried enough before. I stepped outside. It was garbage day, so I had a trash bag in hand and 3 crosses resting inside. I walked over to the garbage bin. Father Samuel was at his talking with a neighbor. I put the trash bag in quickly and closed the lid before he turned around. I didn't want to test fate and have a cross puncture the bag or something. "Morning," I said when he looked at me. "Morning," he nodded. We stared at each other for a moment. "What's wrong?" he asked. Sorry, I forgot your name." Corey, Spencer, right," Father Samuel nodded. "You seem a little anxious." Just thought I would miss garbage day," I murmured. "Anyway, off to work." Father Samuel looked at me curiously. It was like he was analyzing me like some theory on a whiteboard, looking for an answer. He nodded not because he had found an answer, but because he had better things to do. "Have a good day," Father Samuel said, and walked back to his home. I got in my car and left for work. My last sight of Father Samuel was him entering his home and closing the door behind him. I kept my eyes forward and breathed a sigh of relief. When I saw the garbage truck ahead, I saved myself from embarrassment, but I still had a big problem. It crossed my mind that Father Samuel was the one hanging up the crosses, with him being my neighbor. It was enough coincidence to think the priest was responsible. Of course, that meant a priest was breaking into my home somehow without damaging the locks or windows. Whatever the reason, the security system would catch him. Indoor motion detectives would pick something up. I did my part. I could rest easy, but I didn't. When I returned home, I disarmed the security system. I walked around my home and saw crosses in every room. 2 in my bedroom. Each one was different. Some even had Jesus carved on them. A fresh nail in the wall to keep them up. I called the people behind my home security systems to see if my system was disabled at any point, but they told me it wasn't. I did a test, turning it on, and almost immediately set it off. It was working. With nothing more to say to them, I hung up and looked around. I didn't touch the crosses. I was too scared. I looked out the window. Father Samuel was standing on his porch, looking at my home. I marched outside and up to the dividing fence. He met me there. "What happened?" he asked, his face painted with concern. Somebody has been breaking into my house," I told him, trying to control myself, but my anger was building as the fear faded. Hanging up crosses, as in crucifixion crosses, or, "Yeah, those," I said through gritted teeth. "You wouldn't know." "Calm down. I had nothing to do with it," Father Samuel said, realizing what I was saying. "I only just started as a priest. I am not doing door-to-door missionary work, let alone breaking into people's homes to hang up crosses. I don't even have a cross hanging in my home." He was steady in his tone, his words clear and concise. I had no proof that he was guilty, nor did he have proof he was innocent. I had to go with the latter, so I tried to calm down again. "Somebody is doing it," I said slowly. "It's been going on for 3 days now. There's a cross in every room. They didn't set off the alarm or turn it off. It's like the place is haunted." "I have yet to hear of an evil spirit hanging crosses," Father Samuel said with a half-hearted laugh. "If you don't want the crosses, I will take them off your hands. I could give them away at the church." I nodded. It was a reasonable offer, but it still didn't solve the problem. "Yeah, I'll think about it," I said, "but Jesus, it's a little—" Father Samuel scowled deeply and took a step back. "Oh, sorry," I said. "Lord's name in vain, right? I think I'll just— yeah." I turned around and walked away. I could feel his eyes on me, and I just felt more embarrassed. Once inside, I did my best to ignore the crosses. Making my way straight to the bedroom, I turned on the TV and set up something interesting to keep me distracted. I planned to get some sleep and deal with it all the next day. It was a dreamless sleep. I think I woke up a few times just to stare at the darkness, but I would fall asleep again pretty fast. I was too comfortable to think and get agitated. When the warm morning light was bleeding through the curtains, I yawned and slowly woke up. I pulled all the sheets around me, and when I was ready, I sighed and made to get out of bed. I couldn't miss them if I tried. Crosses covered the walls. It was a tight night collage of wooden crosses, all hanging from the nails. One of them was still moving on the nail, slowly coming to a stop, as if it had recently been interacted with. I was frozen in place. That feeling of something being in the room with me was overwhelming. It was the sounds of the world that activated something in me. I stood up and leaned forward, looking into the hall. I could see crosses hanging on the walls outside my bedroom. It was on every wall. I knew that before I even stepped out of the bedroom. How best do I describe it? Everything felt smaller and a lot more foreign. It didn't feel like my home. I was in some kind of madhouse, but instead of tightly packed paintings of sad clowns, it was wall-to-wall Jesus. Everywhere I looked, I put on clothes and left. I didn't bother checking other rooms. I just walked outside and stopped halfway up the path to look back at the house. I could still see them through my open door. I sat down. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually I heard footsteps behind me as Father Samuel walked up the path. "Mr. Spencer, are you okay?" he asked. I shook my head and pointed at the house. He didn't say anything for a minute. I assume he could see them from standing behind me as well. That didn't stop him from walking past me and up to the door, looking inside. Another moment of silence before he reached forward to grab the doorknob, but withdrew his hand. When he turned to face me, Father Samuel's brow was furrowed. He slowly walked up to me, hands behind his back, as if he were thinking deeply on a relaxed stroll. No, that's not it. It was more like a doctor pacing in a hallway, trying to figure out how to break bad news to a patient. "Mr. Spencer, Corey?" he said. I looked up at him, I'm not a heavy sleeper. I think I would have heard if my neighbor hammered thousands of nails into his wall last night. So I take it that you didn't do all that." I shook my head. Father Samuel knelt in front of me. His face wasn't far from mine. Although he was my age, he looked older in his eyes. "I don't think you should stay in that house any more," he said sternly. "That is not normal, obviously, and it worries me greatly. Come, you can stay at my house. I will ask a colleague of mine to get your things from your place, and we can figure this out after." Father Samuel stood up and held out his hand for me to take. I returned my gaze to the house. "It's fine, I'll get my things," I said, standing up and walking over to the house. "I also have somebody I can call. I think he'll let me crash on his couch." "No, it's not safe," Father Samuel said, jogging up behind me, "and I insist you stay at my place. It's much closer, and I have a bed you could—" I stepped into the house and looked up the stairs, mentally gathering what I needed before I did it. I turned around to face Father Samuel. "It's okay, nothing bad has—" I began. Father Samuel looked furious. His fingers were curled in front of his face, like he was ready to bite them off his hands. He was one of those people that got red in the face when they were angry. It was a little shocking seeing someone so calm and collected in such a state. "Didn't you hear me?" he said. "It's not safe." "Calm down," I snapped. "Geez, it's freaky but not dangerous. I'll be right down." "Hurry." Yeah. Loosen the collar a little bit. I'll be fine." I marched up the stairs quickly, but not like I was being chased. I didn't need to make a performance of it. When I walked back into my room, I got my work things into my backpack and started to pick and choose different clothes I could take with me. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw movement. When I turned my head to look at it, a cross slipped off the wall and landed on the ground. Luckily, it landed on a blanket. If I hadn't turned at the right time, I wouldn't have even seen it fall. Might as well put you back up," I murmured. I swung the backpack over my shoulders and then picked up the cross. I lifted it and placed it back on the nail. As I did, I heard yelling down the stairs and out my front door. The voice was furious and growing louder. The words were nonsensical, but the way they reverberated around me was ridiculous as well. The crosses began to shake. It hurt to look at them. All my eyes didn't know which one to focus on. Fear was building in my heart. The rooms felt darker despite the rising sun. The backpack I wore felt heavier. I was suddenly lightheaded, on my hands and knees. "Jesus," I murmured. "What is going on here?" As I said that, the words disappeared and silence followed. The room was lighter, as was the backpack. I could stand without feeling like I was about to crumble or throw up. As for the fear, my heart was pounding, slowed, and I sighed with sudden relief. Was that an earthquake? I said to myself. In this part of the world? I got up and made my way downstairs. The door was still open, But I didn't see Father Samuel waiting down there for me. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw something on the path scrabble away and slip behind the fence. I saw the movement through the gaps between the planks of the fence, but I couldn't get the shape. From that glance, it looked like a spider, but a big one, the size of a large dog, with no sign of Father Samuel, and my heart growing steadily calmer, I decided to go to work and deal with the crosses after. Maybe set up cameras and catch the intruder in the act. Only when I got back, I saw the crosses were gone. Not just every cross, but the nails as well. The walls showed no evidence of being turned into Swiss cheese by thousands of nails. I expected at least a crack or maybe to find some drying spackle, but nothing. I didn't see Father Samuel when he got back. I never saw him again. It took me a while to piece it all together. At some point, I stopped looking at it with the eyes of someone who didn't want to see something else other than some creepy guy breaking into my home. I started looking at all that had happened, remembering the way Father Samuel acted and the words he said. Ghosts and demons don't hang up crosses. A regular person like me didn't hang them up. That much I knew for sure. It was impossible, but not with him. There is evil out there, and it might seem silly coming from a guy like me, after all that I've done, but calling on him works. I don't know exactly what would have happened if something was different. If one thing was different, it wouldn't have ended like it did. I am grateful for that. I say again, there is evil out there. Trust in his name. It's all you have. I was a crew member on a famous movie. They covered up deaths. I've decided not to mention names and be as vague as possible to protect the identity of the victims and their loved ones. Also, I'll refrain from outright stating the movie name, as I don't want to run the risk of being linked as someone working on a set at the time. I was a crew member in a famous dinosaur movie that came out in the 90s. I remember everyone being excited to work on this project, as one of the big scenes in the movie required a giant T-Rex causing havoc among guests at the dinosaur zoo. We had gotten word that they would build a 20-foot animatronic that would be used for most of its scenes. When they rolled the thing in the studio, everyone was in awe at the sheer size and realism of the animatronic. The trouble started around the time shooting began. The scene called for heavy rain to pour down on the T-Rex, so water was artificially sprayed down to the set. What the geniuses in charge didn't count on was the water had soaked into the latex skin, covering the animatronic, causing it to malfunction. These malfunctions would cause the T-Rex to move on its own whenever the cameras were off in between takes. A cheap solution the director had come up with had been to hand dry the animatronic in between takes, so the excess of water did not further damage the star of the movie, During these breaks from filming, the T-Rex head would be moved lower to the ground to facilitate cleanup. A young guy next to the dinosaur's giant jaws, I think he might have been an intern, was yelled at to clean the animatronic. As the poor kid was just doing his job, the animatronic violently shook its head unexpectedly, biting down on the kid's torso with various tons of hydraulic force. The surrounding crew was horrified as the closest were sprayed with warm crimson. A group I had seen working on the mechanical horror earlier rushed to a control panel that apparently controlled the T-Rex. In the time it took the crew members to disengage the animatronic jaw hydraulics, it had completely ripped apart that young intern. There were bits and pieces of human flesh scattered across the set, and what remained of that young kid was dangling from the animatronic's teeth. The filming was stopped for a week. When we returned to work, we were reminded not to speak about the incident on set as we had signed NDAs to work on the film, and we understood our lives could be financially ruined if the studio decided to pursue legal action against us. After a few days of recording with no incidents, it was time for another death scene. Certain precautions were taken to avoid any further unfortunate accidents. Water was kept far away from the animatronics this time. The morning we were supposed to shoot a hunter being eaten alive by one of the dinosaurs, the actor was feeling under the weather, so his stunt double would be replacing him on set. They brought another animatronic in. This time, it was a velociraptor. Everyone was on edge. No one more than the stunt double, who had been strapped onto the animatronic to have it resemble it pouncing on him. It took a bit of convincing, and they might have threatened his employment, but they got the stunt double to start taking falls on camera. With every fall, the director wasn't convinced, making the poor man repeat the scene. On the last take, something went wrong with the animatronic. When the stunt double fell to the ground, the animatronic started malfunctioning, just like the T-Rex had. Its hydraulic jaws snapped down hard on the man's face, causing him to yell out a blood-curdling scream. It didn't take the animatronic long to crush the man's face with its powerful hydraulics. When the movie released, I found out they had used the last take on the film, and those horrible screams were as real as could be. The shooting was suspended for 2 weeks this time. When we got back, the same reminders and low-key threats were given. I noticed that a lot less crew members came back to work, and I couldn't blame them. It seemed that crew safety was very low on the priority list for the studio, and I wished I had joined them. However, I needed to pay my bills. On the last day of shooting, another dinosaur was supposed to attack a character inside of a car. The script called for heavy rain again, but the animatronic would be inside of the car and presumably be completely dry. The animatronic technician was working on the seriously freaky-looking thing, while the rest of the crew prepared the set for filming. While working on the animatronic, its rubber skin was removed to reveal its steel endoskeleton. The technician looked incredibly uncomfortable working on the driver's seat while the animatronic had been set up on the passenger seat facing the driver. I had stopped by to chat and check up on the guy. He was completely calm and relaxed, working on the dinosaur while the rest of us wouldn't go near the things as they had been labeled killers on set by the crew. Part of the reason the tech was so comfortable was because this animatronic was designed to be sound activated and would only simulate attack once a very specific sound was heard in its vicinity. A door slamming shut. I went about my day to handle other matters on set when I heard a commotion coming from where I had just left. The director was chewing out the technician for working too slow on getting the animatronic prepared. To my horror, I watched as the director slammed the car door shut in frustration, activating the animatronic inside. The only thing we could see from the set was how the car had begun to shake violently from the vicious animatronic attack. Having its metallic endoskeleton exposed removed any safeties added to prevent further harm on set. We could hear how the technician screamed out for help as the car windows were sprayed with blood. I sprinted over to the car and opened the door to try and help the poor man. As the door swung open, half the body of the tech came spilling out. His face had been ripped off and he had been gutted. The image that would haunt me in my dreams would be his eyes, still desperately moving around in agonizing pain, finally rolling into the back of his head while his bare bone jaw opened and closed as if he was still trying to speak or scream. That was the final straw that broke the camel's back for me. I quit as fast as I could, and to my knowledge, the movie was finished and was huge, followed by some subpar sequels. They covered up the deaths of those people successfully and either paid off or threatened their family members from speaking out. It has taken me a lifetime to speak about the events of that horrible experience because I'm still under legal threats. I recently found out that they are thinking of making a new movie in the franchise, and it fills me with dread for whatever crew is involved in the making of that movie. I think you should all know the truth. Never stare into open flame. Before I get into this, I want to be clear. I'm not insane. I don't take meds for anything, and I sure as hell don't do any drugs. I'm as sober as they come, mostly by choice, but my folks drilled into me that a clean body is what's best if you want to live well. I say this because every time I tell someone about what I'm about to tell you, they say I smoked too much of something, or I need to be checked by some darn specialist. I know damn well I'm fine, and I regret ever telling anyone who just wants to brush off what I have to say. Not that I don't blame them. Hell, I wouldn't believe it, but ignoring it only makes it worse. I wish it were just a bad pill or brain defect, but it ain't. It happened only a couple months ago. Me and my buddy, we'll call him Red, always headed out into the woods to get away from our obligations back in the city. Nothing beat the smell of the pines and a good old day of fishing while you kick back as the sparrows chirp in the distance. I tell ya, it was like healing the soul every time Red and I went out there. I just wish it stayed that way. You see, this thing never happened before. Not once in all my years of going out into the woods and sleeping under the stars did I ever feel unsafe or worried something might go wrong. Red always brought bear spray and a good amount of supplies in case anything didn't go our way. I slept as sound as a bug in a rug, knowing whatever came our way, me and Red could take it on. But after that night, no amount of bear spray or bullets will ever let me sleep that soundly again. It was the last day of our weekend trip. Red had already packed up his tent and was getting the fire going before dark set in. He always slept in his truck on the last night. Said it made the next morning easier for him. He hated having to get up and start packing. I was chopping wood for the fire with our old axe we brought with us on every trip. We had chopped down an old pine early that day, and I was cutting them into smaller sections so we could get a nice warm fire going. Just before the sun set, we had our fire roaring like you wouldn't believe. Red even called it the perfect campfire, and I had to agree. We stacked the wood like a Jenga tower so the flames could crawl inside the holes and breathe without losing too much heat. We admired our handiwork while Red cracked a beer and I sipped on a cool batch of iced tea I brewed yesterday. We sat there in the dark, with the glow of the fire, chatting about work, movies we hadn't seen, and our own observations on life. But if you've ever sat around a fire, you know for the most part, you're not looking at the people with you. No. You're watching the fire, watching its flames lick the side of the wood, seeing it dance around as it makes its way into the air. You feel it drawing you in, its warmth, its light. It's so easy to get lost in it. Makes you want to touch it, but you know it'll burn, so you compose yourself to just stare at it. Sometimes it feels like you're losing track of time, and you gotta ask yourself, when was the last time I said something? I had that thought when Red and I were sitting around the fire, so I snapped myself back and asked Red when he wanted to wake up tomorrow. That's when I noticed Red was standing. He was holding his beer at his side. The white suds from his drink were beginning to pour out onto the dirt, and his eyes were locked on the flames. I didn't think anything of it at first. Figured he was stretching his legs. I made some dumb joke about watering the ground with beer ain't good for the trees. But he didn't respond. He just kept staring at the fire like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Thinking he was just tired of my crap, I let him be and tossed another log into the flames. It was then Red seemed to shake his fog and come back. He noticed his beer was suddenly empty and crushed the can before venturing over to his truck to grab another. I remember asking him if I pissed him off, but when he returned, he told me he didn't even hear my joke, said he didn't even remember getting up. We both agreed no more logs for the rest of the night, and sleep was a good idea. So after cracking another beer, Red and I sat once again around the fire waiting for the remaining wood to burn. I wish we had just gone to bed. Once again, I found myself watching the fire in silence, staring at the red and yellow light as it swirled and flickered in the darkness. After a while, I swore I started to see shapes or pictures begin to form in the flames, like animated images manifesting within the heat of the fire. I watched as faces began to form and disappear, almost like magic was being performed. I knew it was most likely my brain trying to find patterns in the light. So I let my mind wander as I watched the burning flames continue, but I stopped thinking that way when I swore I heard someone speak. It was a low, rumbling voice mixed with the hissing of the pine wood. It sounded like low thunder and sharp, abrupt words that cut deep into my mind. It asked me if I was cold, if I was lonely, if I was hungry, all at once, like a chorus of rolling voices overlapping each other. I couldn't believe what I was experiencing. I felt so warm, embraced by the fire like a fresh blanket. The flame seemed so inviting, like it had answers to questions I didn't know I had. I wanted to taste the fire, hold the fire, be in the fire. I needed to be part of the flame. I could see hands gesturing me closer towards the embers, pulling me into its glow, its beautiful, welcoming glow. The fire was all around me now as I stood up from my seat. It swirled like a raging tornado, but its heat did not cause me pain. I knew with my very being to trust this flame with all I had within me, to let it take me. I would be safe no matter what happened. I saw beauty manifest itself in the embers as they drew me closer and closer. The smell of the smoke was intoxicating. I wished I would never breathe air again. I wished I'd never feel anything other than this flaring heat. I stepped closer with each heightened sensation that passed over me. I never wanted anything more than to be in the fire. The idea of my flesh melting away brought me joy. To become ash and join the fire became a fate I accepted with eager breath. I stood now before the fire. Its flames rose into the air like a pyre that reached the sky, turning the cosmos red. It burned the stars and ignited the trees, leaving the branches black and charcoal. Nothing could extinguish its light. Nothing will ever stop it. All that was left was to join the burning euphoria and submit myself to its divinity and cleanse myself of this physical form. The voice was a booming orchestra of revelation and jubilee echoing through the sky. It called out with prophetic blessing, promising me a life of ease and without woe. I believed its words, and I reached out to grasp at its flaming tendrils, enveloping my hands with warmth and welcoming touch. For the first time in my life, I knew my purpose. It was to be here. It was to hear these words. It was to burn. The flames would be my guide and take me into its arms. I felt loved. I felt cherished. And then I felt a strike hit me across the face. I hit the ground hard and rubbed my cheek, which felt hot from the impact. I looked around after collecting myself to see Red standing over me, breathing heavily like he just got done lifting weights. I scanned our campsite and saw nothing out of the ordinary. No blazing trees, no red sky filled with fire. Just a campfire, barely lit, and two fools who looked like they just got done fighting each other. It was then I noticed the pain in my hand. I looked down to see my right hand had been severely burned and was not looking so good. I asked Red just what the hell was he thinking punching me in the face. He lifted me to my feet and told me what just happened while he bandaged me up. Apparently, if he hadn't done anything, I'd be a dead man. Red had snapped me out of some kind of trance when he dropped his beer on his foot, and then noticed I was standing over the fire. No matter what he did, he couldn't pull me away from it. He said I looked possessed and wasn't answering him when he called out. He punched me when I started putting my hand into the fire and wouldn't pull back. He said he tried to wrestle me away, but I was locked in, like some kind of statue. The moment he started to hear my skin sizzle, a quick right hook to the jaw was all he could think to do. As he told me this, I couldn't help but think about what I had just seen. The images were as clear as the daylight in my mind. After he finished wrapping my hand, I told him what I saw, to which he simply answered, I wanted to burn too. We didn't talk about the fire after that. In silence, we put out the fire, grabbed our stuff, and drove into town to get me some medical attention. That was the last time Red and I ever went out into the woods, and the last time I ever went near an open flame. Thankfully, the hand is healing up okay, but it's a grim reminder of that night, and every time I catch myself looking at it, that low rumbling voice echoes in my mind. Believe me or not, that's up to you. But if you're ever near a flame and it starts to feel inviting, crack open a beer. It might just save your life.